Reading is one of the most powerful skills a person can learn. It opens you up to new worlds, new perspectives, and sometimes to controversial information the government would prefer you not see. Throughout history, that's exactly why books are questioned, censored, banned, and even burned. You'd think book banning was a thing of the past, but every year there are more and more works called into question and pulled from shelves. I'm Mike with List 25, and today I'm diving into 25 dark and controversial books throughout history. But before we begin, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new content. It truly helps the channel grow. With that being said, let's go. 25. The Satanic Verses. I'm starting off this video heavy and diving straight into the controversy surrounding the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. He published the book in 1988, and it was met with such vitriol that he had to spend the next decade of his life in hiding. The novel blended themes of migration, identity, and magical realism with passages that changed the narrative. Rushdie imagined much of the Prophet Muhammad's life and introduced a character that's thought to be a harsh, derogatory parody that mocked the Quran, the Prophet, and the story of early Islamic tradition. The public outrage was swift. Muslims around the world were furious that their faith was under direct attack. Protests erupted all over the world, with violent demonstrations happening in South Asia and the Middle East, and book burnings were hosted in the streets of the UK. Diplomatic ties were severed between Iran and several Western nations. Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini was particularly incensed over this whole debacle, and issued a fatwa that called for Rushdie's death and urged Muslims to carry out that sentence. Rushdie was forced into hiding under police protection. What's more, booksellers, translators, and publishers who had a hand in the novel's circulation suffered death threats, and some even lost their lives. 24. Critique of Pure Reason. It's not every day you see a philosophy book land on a banned book list, but Immanuel Kant pulled that off with his 1781 masterpiece, Critique of Pure Reason. While the book wasn't attempting to attack religion directly, it did something that had the Catholic Church incredibly nervous. Kant argued that we can't actually prove anything beyond our experience, like the spiritual realm or God. They were particularly perturbed by his argument that humans couldn't use reason to prove there was or wasn't a God because our minds can only understand what we can experience, and we structure reality based on that experience. The implications of this were massive. If reason couldn't prove God, then faith had to stand on its own without the crutch of philosophical ideals. As you can imagine, Catholic authorities weren't having it, and the book was promptly banned in several regions. They saw it as outright undermining the foundation of religious certainty. The real irony here is that Kant believed his work actually made room for faith by showing where reason ends and belief begins. 23. Mein Kampf. Few books in history carry the weight and horror of this one. In 1923, Adolf Hitler wrote his manifesto, Mein Kampf, partly during his imprisonment following the failed Beer Hall Putsch. He published it in 1925. And what started as an autobiography and political rantings became the blueprint for one of the darkest chapters in all of human history. The book is rife with extreme German nationalism, Aryan supremacy, and racial purity obsessions. Hitler made no effort to hide his hatred. In fact, he put it on full display and openly called for the persecution and elimination of the Jewish people. He blamed us for every single problem Germany faced. This wasn't subtle propaganda. It was the roadmap for his rise to power. After World War II and the Holocaust, Mein Kampf was banned or restricted in countries across the world. Bavaria held the copyright after Hitler's death and refused to allow its publication for decades to keep it out of neo-Nazi hands. Russia and Austria, among other European nations, followed suit with similar restrictions. The USA, on the other hand, allows it to be printed under free speech protections. However, they often add in scholarly annotations to counter its vile ideology. 22. The Prince. Niccolò Machiavelli wrote a book so controversial that it didn't just ruffle feathers when it was published, it landed him the title of the Teacher of Evil. Released in 1532, 5 years after his death, it was almost a blessing he wasn't around when it came out, because the backlash was intense and immediate. Machiavelli laid out a brutal guide for rulers on how to manipulate and use deception and cruelty to keep their states stable. His safer to be feared than loved mentality summed up this approach. In his mind, there was no need for a leader to be morally righteous, but there was a need for order, even if it came at the cost of the people. The Catholic Church was appalled by Machiavelli's writings and added the book to the Index of Prohibited Books in 1559. To them, the prince undermined morality. Additionally, moralists and even monarchs feared the book would inspire treachery and tyranny and turn leaders into ruthless figureheads. They deemed Niccolò Machiavelli downright dangerous and immoral, and soon his name became synonymous with evil. His name literally became the term Machiavellian, used to describe ruthless and deceitful behavior, and to this day, it's still part of Machiavelli's legacy. The irony? Machiavelli was merely writing down what rulers around the world had been doing all along. His mistake was saying the quiet part out loud. 21. Uncle Tom's Cabin. When Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, she had no idea it would start a war. But in essence, that's exactly what it did. The novel became an instant sensation in the North, and readers everywhere were horrified when confronted by the brutal realities of slavery in the South. The book told the story of an enslaved man who endured unimaginable cruelty while doing all he could to maintain his faith and dignity. Stowe didn't shy away from highlighting the violence, the terror of family separation, or the dehumanization of slaves. Abolitionists in the North ate it up, and it became the fuel for the movement. Southern slave owners, on the other hand, saw it as a direct attack on their way of life. The backlash from the South was severe, and the book was banned across several states. It was so intense that even being seen with a copy could have serious consequences. The damage was done, though, and eyes were open all across the North. It's even alleged that Abraham Lincoln met Harriet during the Civil War and is quoted as greeting her with, "So, you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." 20. The Rights of Man. Thomas Paine was famous for making people incredibly angry with his writing, but nothing got under people's skin quite as much as The Rights of Man. Published in 1791, this was a full-scale defiance of the French Revolution and a shockingly brutal takedown of aristocracy and monarchy. He argued that the hereditary rule was fundamentally unjust and that people deserved a representative Republican government instead. To his credit, it didn't just critique the system that the rich and powerful abused, it also advocated for radical reforms. He offered solutions like public education and pensions that were shockingly progressive during that period. British authorities claimed the book was dangerous propaganda, and not only was it swiftly banned, but they also charged Paine with seditious libel, forcing him to flee to France to evade arrest. Despite, or maybe because of, all this, the book became a massive bestseller and fueled movements across Europe and America. 19. The Talmud. I'm going all the way back to 400 to 500 CE to discuss a Jewish law and tradition central text that Christian authorities viewed as heretical and threatening to their doctrine. The Talmud became a target of medieval Christian authorities and stayed under attack for 12 centuries. Church scholars accused the literature of blasphemy and claimed it contradicted and mocked Christian teachings. The most outrageous episode happened in 1242 in Paris, when thousands of Talmudic manuscripts were burned after the church condemned the text. It was a devastating loss of Jewish culture and scholarship. Similar bans and burnings followed across Spain, Italy, and the Holy Roman Empire over the following centuries. The Inquisition seized and destroyed copies whenever they found them. These attacks weren't just about books. They were attempts to erase Jewish knowledge and identity. Nevertheless, the Talmud survived, but the scars of these burnings remain in Jewish memory even now. 18. Dianetics. L. Ron Hubbard's Dianetics, the modern science of mental health, hit the shelves in 1950 and immediately stirred up controversy. Hubbard claimed he discovered a revolutionary approach to self-improvement psychology, but the medical and scientific communities shot it down as pseudoscience from day one. Psychologists, psychiatrists, and medical professionals tore Hubbard's work apart. They cited its lack of credible evidence and publicly denounced the book, calling it dangerous and misleading. Experts warned that it encouraged people to abandon legitimate medical treatments for unproven methods and outright called Hubbard's organization a cult. That didn't stop Hubbard, though. He took Dianetics and expanded it into a whole religion and created Scientology. His devout followers from the Church of Scientology take his words as gospel and use its questionable methods. Hubbard's auditing to fix the engrams that cause irrational behavior and illness to reach a state called clear. Scientology is still one of the most hotly criticized religions, with experts noting the organization's strict hierarchy and hostility towards others as highly problematic. 17. A Clockwork Orange. Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange wasn't just contentious when it came out in 1962, it was downright shocking. The novel follows a delinquent teenager named Alex who revels in acts of assault, robbery, and sexual violence. The work is narrated in a slang dialect called Nadsat that Burgess invented solely for this book. The graphic depictions of violence were disturbing enough on their own, but what sparked the most debate was the story's core moral dilemma. When Alex is caught, the state subjects him to an experimental treatment called the Ludovico technique that conditions him to feel intense nausea at the thought of violence or sex. It renders him physically incapable of choosing evil. The novel forces readers to face the uncomfortable question of whether or not someone who is stripped of free will can truly be good, or if they become just a clockwork orange, something that looks human but is really a programmed machine. It challenges whether a society that removes choice is any better than the violence it's attempting to eliminate. 16. Of Mice and Men. John Steinbeck's 1937 novel, Of Mice and Men, is a book that seems to live permanently on the banned book list. It tells the story of displaced migrant workers George Milton and Lenny Small, who dream of owning a piece of land during the Great Depression. Sadly, it doesn't end well for them. The book highlights raw depictions of loneliness, poverty, and shattered hope that reflect the struggles of ordinary people during that era. But those same elements are what sparked massive controversy. Libraries and school boards across the US have challenged or banned it repeatedly over decades. The complaints center around the use of profanity, racial slurs, and the bleak portrayals of ableism, sexism, and racism. While these elements accurately reflect the realities of the 1930s, critics argue they perpetuate harmful stereotypes and are inappropriate for students. The irony of all this? Steinbeck wasn't trying to provide comfort with his writing. He was showing everyone exactly how ugly the world can be. 15. Beloved. This is another frequently banned book. This one went from being a Pulitzer Prize winner in 1988 to being frequently challenged and banned in schools. Toni Morrison's Beloved was published in 1987, and much like Uncle Tom's Cabin, depicted the brutalities of slavery. The book follows a formerly enslaved woman who is haunted by the ghost of the daughter she killed to save her from being recaptured into slavery. It was inspired by the true story of Margaret Garner, and Morrison didn't hold back. The book talks about the horrors of enslavement in unflinching detail. She wrote about beatings, infanticide, and the lasting trauma that it came with. Morrison wanted the readers to understand exactly what enslaved people endured. Opponents petitioned to have the book removed from curricula, claiming the violence and disturbing imagery weren't appropriate for teenagers, and even claimed it was morally corrupting. Critics of the ban argue that the arguments are just a cover for the discomfort over confronting America's racist history. 14. Fight Club. Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club is a book that actually scared authorities when it was published in 1996. So much so that it was almost instantly banned in several countries over fears that it glorified violence and anti-establishment extremism. The depictions of bare-knuckle fighting, terrorism, and psychological instability unsettled critics just as much as state heads who feared copycat behavior. The novel follows an unnamed narrator who meets Tyler Durden, a man who rebels against consumer culture and social conformity. What starts as his secret outlet for men to vent in a fight club quickly spirals into a violent anarchist movement called Project Mayhem that's hell-bent on dismantling modern society. The controversy became even more widespread with the release of David Fincher's 1999 film adaptation. Much like the book, multiple countries banned the film outright over panic that it would fuel nihilism and chaos. After being released on home video, however, it became quite the cult classic. But we don't talk about it. 13. Fahrenheit 451. The irony of Ray Bradbury's 1953 novel Fahrenheit 451 hitting the banned list is almost too perfect to believe. But it's true. His novel was about a future society where books were outlawed and firemen were tasked with burning them to suppress independent thought. It was a warning against censorship, and yet it's been censored time and time again by school boards. Entire school districts refused to put it on their shelves due to depictions of drug use, the portrayal of violence, and the use of profanity. Others didn't like its bleak views of society and worried it would encourage young minds to rebel against authority. The most absurd twist? A school edition was put into print with altered or completely removed passages, effectively censoring the work, which is exactly what the story condemns. Bradbury didn't shy away from calling out the critics. He defended his work and insisted the whole point of Fahrenheit 451 is to make readers uncomfortable enough to think critically about state control. 12. Catch-22. Another book that unsettled authorities was Joseph Heller's Catch-22. It sparked mass controversy when it came out in 1961 by launching a full-out assault on military bureaucracy and war itself. The story concentrates on Captain John Yossarian, a U.S. Air Force bombardier during World War II, who's desperate to stay alive while everyone around him seems just fine sending him to his death. The book's title refers to the absurd paradox that soldiers can't escape dangerous missions by claiming insanity because the desire to avoid death proves that they're sane enough to keep fighting. This did not impress critics. They came down harshly on Heller for the book's plot, the content, the use of profanity, and the treatment of military officers. It was deemed disrespectful, and many schools and libraries chose to restrict it. Heller's cynical portrayal of military life clashed with the traditional patriotic depictions people expected. This man didn't glorify combat. Instead, he worked to expose the dehumanization of war. People weren't ready to hear that message, though. 11. The Divine Comedy. Dante Alighieri made some enemies in high places when he penned the Divine Comedy in 1320. His epic poem took readers through hell, purgatory, and paradise, which sounds like something people at the time couldn't get upset about, right? Wrong. His depiction of hell caused a huge uproar. Dante had the audacity to place religious figures such as clergy members and even popes in the depths of hell. The church was furious. They were greatly offended to have their people painted as corrupt officials who pursued power and wealth instead of spiritual leadership. It didn't quite matter that some of those officials were, in fact, corrupt. Dante wasn't subtle in his call-out either. The poem departed from formal theological doctrine, and the church objected to his portrayal of the afterlife, calling it presumptuous and heretical. Who is he to decide who belonged where and why? Wasn't it God's job to make those calls? They felt he overstepped and loudly condemned the work. None of that stopped the poem from circulating, though, and to this day it remains one of the most influential works in Western literature. 10. The Sorrows of Young Werther. The novel The Sorrows of Young Werther by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was released in 1774 and was swiftly banned in several areas, as authorities feared it glamorized suicide. The novel is written as letters from a young artist named Werther to his friend Wilhelm. Werther writes about his unrequited love for Charlotte, a woman who is engaged to another man. The notes highlight his despair, growing isolation, and longing, which eventually overwhelm him to the point where he takes his own life. Werther's romantic intensity and tragic end were believed to inspire impressionable readers, and the concern was justified. There's documentation of a surge of copycat suicides following the novel's publication. This dangerous and heartbreaking phenomenon was so widespread that it was termed the Werther effect. 9. Native Son. Native Son by Richard Wright hit the shelves in 1940 and sparked mass outrage. The novel follows Bigger Thomas, an impoverished black man living in Chicago's segregated South Side. In a moment of panic, he accidentally kills a white woman named Mary Dalton and becomes the focus of intense media scrutiny and a brutal police investigation. As the walls close in and the pressure mounts, Bigger Thomas suffers through other horrible and tragic decisions, including his girlfriend Bessie in an attempt to cover up his first crime. The graphic content and violence were bad enough, but what made authorities really uncomfortable was Wright's unflinching critique of racial inequality in the US. He exposed how systemic racism traps people in the cycles of poverty, desperation, and fear. It forced readers to dive deeper into the truths about society. Libraries and schools refused to stock copies because it portrayed racial oppression in a way that was politically dangerous and questioned social order. 8. Invisible Man. Another book that quickly became the target of censorship is Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. The 1952 novel has an unnamed black narrator navigating a society that refuses to see him as a full human being. The book takes the narrator on a contentious journey where he encounters racism, betrayals, and exploitation by not only white supremacists, but also well-meaning leftists and even black nationalist groups as he makes his way from the South to Harlem. Like the other works on this list, schools and libraries banned or challenged the book due to its candid portrayal of American society and overt racism. Some considered these topics too politically subversive. On top of that, they called out the explicit language, violence, and sexual content. State leaders deemed it highly inappropriate, especially for young readers. These days, Invisible Man is recognized as a landmark work of American literature, and Ellison's unflinching exploration of confrontational topics is celebrated instead of hidden. 7. Slaughterhouse-Five. Kurt Vonnegut was not messing around in 1969 when he published Slaughterhouse-Five. The novel centers around Billy Pilgrim, a soldier who becomes unstuck in time. He experiences moments from his life completely out of sequence, including when he was a prisoner of war during World War II when the Dresden firebombing occurred. This book blends dark humor and science fiction with surrealism that shows the horrors of war and the trauma faced by soldiers. Billy's detached and fatalistic perspective serves as a weapon against militarism and the glorification of war. Obviously, this message didn't sit well with community leaders. They weren't going to sit back and allow the overtly anti-war messages to spread. On top of that, the use of profanity, violence, and sexual content was also used as an excuse to ban the book from school shelves. Despite all this, it's now viewed as a powerful statement that dives into the senselessness of war. 6. 1984. When George Orwell published 1984 in 1949, it didn't take authoritarian governments long to recognize it as a direct threat. The novel paints a chilling picture of life under a totalitarian state that uses propaganda, psychological manipulation, and constant surveillance to control every single aspect of the lives of citizens who are living under Big Brother. The Soviet Union and other Stalinist regimes banned the book upon publication because it was too on the nose. Orwell's writing wasn't science fiction. It was the reality for millions who were living under Joseph Stalin's rule. The rewriting of history, the suppression of individual opinions, and the thought police were on the money. It was all there. The powers that be couldn't sit back and allow their citizens to read a book that accurately exposed their oppression. 1984 exposed the realities of what Stalin had created and was a warning about the dangers of living in a totalitarian society. 5. Justine. Marquis de Sade's Justine was scandalous from the moment it was published in 1791, and it wasn't just because of its explicit content. At the heart of this book is a virtuous young woman who suffers greatly. She endures torture, degradation, and horrendous abuse despite her moral goodness. The author made a deliberate inversion of the idea that being righteous came with rewards. De Sade wasn't just shocking readers with these scenes. He was arguing that traditional morality was essentially meaningless. Religious leaders saw this as a very dangerous message. For them, it was a direct attack on the social order that cultivated the landscape of 18th century France. The book was banned, and the state ordered de Sade's arrest. The establishment saw Justine as blasphemous and punished Marquis for daring to write such a scathing and corrupt piece that threatened the very foundations of their society. 4. Tropic of Cancer. Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer was published in 1934 in Paris, but American readers couldn't get their hands on the work for nearly 3 decades. It was a semi-autobiographical novel that detailed Miller's experiences as a struggling writer in France. It was complete with explicit passages and gave a raw, unfiltered look at bohemian life, and officials deemed the whole thing utterly obscene. U.S. Customs even used a strict anti-obscenity law of the time to seize copies at the border, and prosecutors went after anyone and everyone who tried to distribute it domestically. The book was deemed immoral and treated as a threat to public decency. This ban lasted all the way until 1961, when Grove Press took the leap and published it in the United States. This move sparked landmark legal battles that went all the way to the Supreme Court. This book played a significant role in dismantling censorship laws, and the case opened the doors to artistic freedom in American literature. 3. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is arguably one of the most dangerous and diabolical pieces of propaganda the world has ever seen. This fabricated document was published in Russia in 1903 and claimed to reveal a Jewish global domination conspiracy. It outlines supposed secret meetings of Jewish leaders, their plans to manipulate governments and societies, and even includes fake minutes. The entire work is a complete forgery and draws from earlier political satire and conspiracy theories. It was presented as an absolute fact, though, despite not having a lick of truth to it. By the time the writings were exposed as a hoax, the damage was already done. The text fueled devastating anti-Semitism and was used to justify prejudice and violence toward the Jewish communities. Adding to the madness was how widely circulated it was by the Russian Empire and Nazi Germany, as well as other anti-Semitic organizations that were designed to promote hate. The impact was profound and provided the ideological groundwork for the Holocaust. 2. Forever Amber. Our second-to-last book is an epic romance that had way too much heat. Kathleen Winsor's Forever Amber caused a firestorm when it hit the shelves in 1944. The book chronicles the life of Amber St. Clair, a poor woman from 17th century Restoration England who sets out to seduce and manipulate her way into social power and great wealth. Windsor's detailed descriptions of Amber's various heated love affairs and pregnancies out of wedlock had the church up in arms. It was absolutely shocking for the time and very sensational. What outraged critics most was Amber's attitude. This woman refused to be shamed and was unapologetic and unrepentant throughout her journey. This kind of female agency clashed with the conservative expectations society held. This led to several accusations of obscenity. The book was denounced by the Catholic Church and other religious groups, outright banned in Boston, and barred from being shelved in libraries all across America and Britain. The backlash was swift and loud, but so were the consumers. The more the book was criticized, the more it sold. Forever Amber sold millions of copies and became a publishing phenomenon that most women would only read in private. It paved the way for more open explorations of sexuality in popular literature. 1. The Bible. It may come as a huge shock that the last book on our list has been banned throughout history. Our number 1 slot goes to the Bible. This masterpiece has suffered its own share of censorship over centuries, particularly when translations threaten the church. In fact, the Roman Catholic Church restricted access to the scripture, insisting it remain in Latin and only allowing clergy to interpret it. William Tyndale changed everything in 1525 when he translated the New Testament into English. His work was condemned immediately by the church, and officials took to burning those copies and calling it heretical. Tyndale was hunted for over a decade in Europe before being captured, strangled, and burned at the stake in 1536 for the crime of making scripture accessible to ordinary people. The church feared that Tyndale, using a clearer and more understandable vernacular, would undermine their authority and allow heretical interpretations to spread. They were right to worry. His translation fueled the Protestant Reformation and forever changed how people engaged with religious texts. Well, there you have it. 25 books that are so powerful or so threatening or so provocative that someone, somewhere, decided the world either wasn't ready for them or didn't need to see them. Which one took you by surprise? Was it the books that were used as propaganda during the Holocaust? Or was it the irony of censoring a book that was, about censorship? These books definitely prove that ideas can be seen just as dangerous as weapons. And if you learned something today, you'll love our video, 25 Unanswered Questions About the Universe. It's packed with wild stories that'll make you question everything about life here on Earth. But before you go, let's test your skills with a little trivia. Which classic novel was written entirely while its author was in prison? A. The Count of Monte Cristo. B. Don Quixote. C. The Pilgrim's Progress. Or D. Le Mot Arthur. Pop your answers in the comments below. And now that's it for today, friends. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button, comment, share, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you next time. Thank you guys so much.